I'm John D. Carter. I've been a member of NTL, or at least active in NTL, since 1970. I'm actually not sure exactly when I became a member of NTL because I never went through the traditional process that people go through of joining NTL, like the internship program that people used to go through, or applying, or anything of that nature.
Okay.
I was invited to train as a trainer in the higher education lab in 1970 that was being conducted in Bethel. And we typically had something like 100 participants in each of the gathering of those that went on for many, many years. I don't remember exactly how many years, but it was probably one of the largest labs at Bethel during that particular time. And at the time that I was invited there, I had only actually participated in one formal NTL event, which was my introduction to NTL, which was a micro lab of probably about 100 people that was conducted by Steve Sutherland, who was a member of NTL at that time. And he had been hired by my mentor, who was Van Richards, to do that at the University of California, Davis. I spent a large part of my professional life working as a consultant. Some people would say an OD consultant, but I actually never labeled myself as an OD practitioner or OD consultant, even though I was given the Lifetime Achievement Award by ODN in 2009, and said to them that even though I was very appreciative of receiving the award, I said I never labeled myself as an OD consultant, even though I participated in some of the most innovative, creative organizational interventions that have been done in the US, or for that matter, possibly any place in the world. But of all of those interventions, there's not a single one that if we had introduced it as an OD intervention, it probably would have ever seen the light of day. Yet, there's no question in my mind that the primary bodies of knowledge that I used in all of that work was, number one, OD theory, concept, and method, and Gestalt organization and systems development theory, concept, and method. In our traditional ways of identifying gender, I suppose most people consider me a male, even though in most of those sociogram things that we used to do, I used to stand in the middle between male and female, and between black and white, and all of those other things. I didn't actually fit into any of those categories. I took quite a beating sometimes for not being willing to put myself in one of those society social categories that people wanted to divide us into. Again, by race, most people would consider me or label me as probably Black, African American, Negro, colored, depending upon their generation or how they grew up, or how they grew up. I like to personally think of myself first as human, and all of those other things as secondary. I'm 78 years old at this point. Have probably lived with death on my shoulder for the last 12 or 13 years. And so I'm grateful to be alive and still functioning and trying to make a difference with my presence.
Yeah.
That's probably enough.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's and there's quite a bit in there. We're not going to go in that direction, but we want to turn our attention to NTL. And when you think of your experiences within NTL over the years, and I know you said you started in NTL around 1970. Can you recall time that for you represented the best of NTL, and what made it so? What was the impact on you? How were you involved? Can you tell me a story?
You know, I'm considered one of the originators of appreciative inquiry. And in this particular intervention, I feel like that's one of the worst questions. Because in the time that I've been a part of NTL, there are so many different experiences. There's literally no possibility of naming the one that was the most impactful or most significant.
So before you continue, John, let me ask, what would be a better question?
In the context of appreciative inquiry?
Yes, please.
What do you consider the life-giving forces of NTL? And how were those life-giving forces present or evident in your most memorable experiences of NTL?
Go ahead with that question, then. I like it.
My introduction to NTL was actually in my orientation meeting at the University of California, Davis. I had been hired by Van Richards to come to the University of California, Davis to participate in moving the University of California, Davis from a old Aggie school campus of 2,500 students to a campus of 18,000 students in a period of 2 years.
Wow. And
we achieved that. And actually, for many years, maybe even to today, Davis actually was applying students first choice over Berkeley or over UCLA or any of the other 9 campuses. But in our orientation, we participated in a micro lab, which was a group of 100 people, most of whom have not met each other at that particular time. And Steve Sutherland took us through basically kindergarten. I mean, kindergarten experiences of making contact with ourselves and others and talking about our hopes and wishes and fears in relationship to the work that we were going to be doing primarily in the residence halls, but on that campus over the next number of years. And at the end of it, I went up to him and I said, I don't know what the hell you just did with us or how you did it, but it was magical. I feel like my life has changed. And I heard other people using the same language in terms of, in less than a day's time, people had an experience that they feel changed their life, changed the way that they were perceiving themselves or perceiving others. I want to be able to do that. And he said, oh, you can't just go do that. It's too dangerous. And you have to do this and you have to do the other. And you have to have this and you have to have that. And I said, well, that sounds like a lot of bullshit to me. You know, I didn't see anything so complicated that I couldn't just take people out and take them through those experiences. He said, you absolutely should not do that. So I went to my mentor and I said, you just had us go through an experience. And when I talked to Steve and asked him, what did I need to do to replicate that? Because I'd like to do that with the people in my dormitory. I'd like to be able to just take people off and take them through that kind of experience. And he told me that I shouldn't do that. It was too dangerous. And I would need to have this kind of training and that kind of training or whatever. I said, I told him, and I'm telling you, don't ever take me through anything like that again. that you're going to tell me that I can't basically take what I've learned, take what I've experienced, and go out and do it with others. I said, I just consider that ridiculous and unacceptable. So he said, well, uh, what he told you is only a partial truth. And he said, I'll make sure that you get introduced to the people who are doing that kind of training in the US and around the world. And so to make a long story short, his mentor was a guy named Martin Erickson. And Martin Erickson had been at the University of Michigan with Leland Bradford and a bunch of those folks. And the guy who became the head of my dissertation, Suresh Srivastava, Charlie Seashore, and Suresh were roommates. In fact, Eric was one of their roommates at Michigan. And he introduced me to Eric, and Eric hired me to do a consulting job at the University of Utah. And after that, he said, I want you to come to Bethel this summer and work on the staff of the higher ed lab. And he said, it's a lab that's run by NTL. And he said, NTL is going through a retraction right now for a whole variety of reasons. And he said, so a lot of people who are used to getting staff positions are probably not going to get them. He says, you're going to probably take a lot of crap for being there and not being inside of their inner circle. People are going to wonder how you got there. Some of them are probably even going to assume that you slept your way there because they'll think that, you must be in some kind of relationship with me. He said, you know, that's not true. I know that that's not true. He said, you're being invited because you have the skills and the ability to do exactly what we need done in that lab and on our staff. And so he invited me, and the rest is history in terms of my being a part of NTL. Now, there's a little backstory in this that we don't have time to talk about here, but before—
Not even a short version?
Huh?
Not even a short version?
Well, the short version is that before I went off to Bethel that summer, and before I actually got invited there by Eric, I got invited to a meeting in St. Louis that, as I remember, was being run by Vlad Dupre. And they had gotten a grant from the Ford Foundation specifically to train Blacks to do the kind of training that NTL did.
Okay.
And so I'm not sure how I got invited to that. Van may have done something to get my name in that pool because I didn't know any of the people that were there. But anyway, I showed up for that. And as they talked about what was taking place, it became clear that this was a training program for Blacks who were interested in being members of NTL, but it wasn't NTL's traditional internship program that most people were going through at that point to get into NTL. In fact, Van Richard was actually in the internship at that time.
Okay.
And the gist of it was that they were going to take us through this training. And then after we got through this training, that some of us might be considered for doing whatever would then be required of us to become part of NTL. And I said, that's crazy. That's more than crazy. That's insane. I said, you setting up a multiple class system with Black people at the bottom of it. And we're going to have to jump all of these hoops, and then we're still going to have to go jump the real hoops. And I said, I'm not doing that. So yeah. I didn't do that, and I got invited to train at NTL, and exactly what Eric told me was going to happen happened. But that man was brilliant. He basically went through all of the primary people that I would end up interacting with there. And he said, the way that this person is going to basically try to get to you is this. He'll say this about you, or he'll raise this question with you, or whatever. He went through it one by one. And I'll tell you, he didn't miss a single beat. Wow. He had them pegged, just, and it was it was my introduction to pecking order in a way that I had never experienced before, and how people maintain that pecking order by their interactions with each other. And I'm not saying that with any negative valence on it. I'm just saying it is the reality of what it is, what it was. But I use this as an opportunity, and I know we're probably getting a little bit off the track here, but the person that I actually ended up admiring the most in that whole Bethel community, that whole professional community of NTL, and in some ways I would say even as much or more than anybody in my University of California, Davis community, which was a Mecca like Bethel in and of itself.
Okay.
Was that Nancy Cohen? Are you familiar with Nancy Cohen?
I've heard the name, but I'm not, I don't know about.
She used to run the office in Bethel every summer, and she ran it like a military drill sergeant, you know. And didn't matter whether you were Leland Bradford, whether you were Charlie Seashore, whether you were Walter Sykes, it didn't matter who you were. She said, you bring your stuff in and you put it in the basket over there. And we deal with it on first in, first out basis. That's how we do the work here in terms of your handouts and everything else that you need. If you miss the deadline for getting in the basket, we have no obligation about when we will get it to you. We will get it to you when we get it to you. And it doesn't matter who you are. And it doesn't matter if you missed it by a minute, you missed it by 5 minutes, you missed it by half a day, you missed it. That's it. That's it. She was just wonderful. And she didn't move off of that for anybody. The pecking order there meant nothing to her. And I asked her at one point, again, I know we're supposed to stay away from negatives, but I asked her, I said, Nancy, I said, you know, I just admire you. I love the way that you run this office and the way that you manage all these high-powered people in terms of their narcissism and their self-centric, you know, whatever, and they're getting whatever they want whenever they want it. And when they say jump, people just ask them how high. And I said, and most of the people I watch them, they come in as administrators or whatever, but ultimately they decide they want to belong to NTL. And I said, and so they start doing whatever they need to become a member. And many of them become members. That's great thing. I said, how come you never wanted to become a member? And she said, John, she said, I've seen how you treat each other. And she said, if I became a member, you'd probably treat me like that. And that's not going to happen.
Wow. Wow. That's interesting. Can't go down that road, but that's interesting. Oh boy. Okay. Okay. Unconventional.
Let me just close here with what was the most important point of that. What I found in Bethel was a community of learners, Richard, who not only wanted to improve their own self-awareness and their own, I'm going to use kind of jargony language, but self-realization, but they wanted to do that with other people, the same as I walked away from that first experience in Davis.
Yeah.
And language that I now use with all of the people who have come to work with us at the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland, I think Davis, NTL, like at that point, SON and some other places, which were personal growth hubs, attracted what I label as the lunatic fringe. And I can't say that I knew a single person in NTL who wasn't lunatic fringe. And most of the people that I knew who were working at Davis were lunatic fringe. And lunatic fringe for me is people who basically have one foot inside the traditional system of, you know, organizations or groups or whatever, and one foot outside. And they're always trying to, in one way or another, make things better so that people have a better experience for themselves, know how to create a better experience for other people. And the most important thing for me is they walk away from those experiences knowing how to actually repeat that experience or a similar learning environment for other people.
Yeah.
I went to Case Western Reserve for the same reason. When I went there, it was that kind of community. I went to the Gestalt Institute for that same reason. It was that kind of community and that kind of collection of people.
Lunatic fringe. Interesting choice of words. Let's change gears here a little bit and talk about values. And when you think about the community that's NTL, and what is it that you value most about that community?
What I like most about that community, Davis, the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland, Case Western Reserve, is that for all of their espoused values, the fact is they are the most valueless places that I have ever been a part of.
Most
And
valueless places is what you said?
yes. And what I mean,
I noticed you didn't mention NTL as you were making that list.
no, I put NTL in that list also.
Okay.
Yeah, I put NTL in that list also.
Tell me more about valueless.
Valueless in the fact that basically they are places where people can find the space to actually become who they ought to be.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons I talk about the lunatic fringe, because it's one of those places where people can come and say out loud things that they wouldn't say in any other environment, do things that they wouldn't do in other environments, experiment in ways that they wouldn't experiment in other environments, and in most cases, pay little price for it, unless you're dumb enough to become one of the organizational leaders. And all of those organizations tend to kill off organizational leaders. Again, that gets into the thing, if we actually lived out our values, we would probably be cultures that admire and revere our founders and our founding fathers and whatnot. And the fact is, none of those organizations do that. You know, mostly because they killed off whoever their leaders were at any particular time, even though if you look at the time that they were leaders and what they were doing, they probably did a marvelous job. You know, people of color sometimes suffer the most for taking on one of those leadership roles and thinking that they can continue to experiment and act out. I'm going to use that language and use that environment as a playground for their personal and professional growth and development. It gets harder if you take on any kind of actual role of responsibility or accountability.
I'm trying to connect that kind of space, as you described it, where people can experiment and usually pay a relatively low price for it, try different things, try new things, with being valueless.
Okay, the valueless is in relationship to the espoused values of the organization. And there is a I-we conflict. There's a conflict between I want and we need. That is a natural conflict that always has to, it's always present and always has to be resolved. Those environments tend to espouse or state the belief that you can do anything that you want to do here. And the fact is, just like our larger society, each of those organizations has within it its own lunatic fringe. So
Mm,
there is a space for some people who pretty much can do whatever they want to do. And those people are held up to say, when you say, well, I can't do this, well, look at Joe and look at Jane and look at Mary and look at Bill and look at Bob. They're
mhm,
doing exactly what they want to do. But if you try to do exactly what those people are doing, you might pay an incredible price for
mhm, mhm. And
it.
so,
And
go ahead, please. Finish.
no, and again, in most organizations, I think you will find a lunatic fringe like that, but most organizations can only support a small number of people in the organization actually doing whatever it is that they want to do. So they are your primary innovators, creators, whatever. And most of the other people pretty much have to do the things that keep the lights on, keep the gas coming, um, make the place run.
Yeah.
And they don't have the freedom to experiment
Mhm.
on that cutting edge of doing whatever it is that you want to do. I, luckily enough, not only had that experience at Davis, I had that experience at Case Western Reserve, I had that experience at the Custodian Institute of Cleveland, I had that experience with NTL. I actually became a leader in every last single one of those organizations. Um, and to a large degree, escape paying the price that most people have to pay for being in those leadership roles.
So I'm curious about values your own values, because given what you've just said, it sounds like you are on the fringe of the lunatic fringe.
Most of the time, that's true.
Because you're saying you've had those experiences in multiple places, which I would imagine is not true for most people. Some people would have an experience, but you've had multiple of them, and then got into leadership roles in those organizations, but generally escaping the price.
Mhm.
What is it about your own values that attracts you to these types of organizations, particularly NTL, and then allows you to experiment and live as you do, but escape paying the price?
I think I have learned to manage that boundary of I want, we need very
Mm,
effectively and very efficiently. And the only place that I haven't had to manage that boundary was at the University of California, Davis.
mhm,
And at the University of California, Davis, um, I made a decision very early on that I was going to basically do whatever I thought was in the interest of my personal and professional growth and development, even if I got fired
okay.
for
Mhm,
it. I can't think of any place else that I've actually made that decision as adamantly as I made it at the University of California, Davis. And so, in all of those other situations, I can name more than my 10 digits on the end of my hands,
mhm,
thumbs, and my fingers of where I compromise, not in terms of selling my soul to the devil or um, reducing my own self-esteem or my self-worth, because that's the challenge for most people on the lunatic fringe who are women, people of color, minorities to some extent, even though that's a mix, because when people say minority and you're a person of color, I say, if you take that up to the world level, we're not the minority, so
sure.
exactly what do you mean by that? But if I give you an example, and again, I know we're supposed to stay out of negative things, but uh, when I was on the board of NTL, I was on the board and the executive board. Now, the executive board was made up of some of my dearest friends. I mean, Carolyn Lukensmeyer, Tom Isgar, um, I'm blocking his name, the guy who started up the Portsmouth Consulting Group, and myself, we were the executive board of NTL. And we made a commitment to each other that we were only going to do what was in the interest of NTL. And we would not be like many former leaders of NTL who had basically ripped the organization off in one way or another. In fact, we said, you know, if there's anything that any of us want out of this organization, we need to put it up on the table and we need to talk about it. And if it's self-serving and not whole-serving, we're not going to do it.
Right.
And to my knowledge, not a single one of us ever said there was a single thing we wanted from the organization other than to make the organization better. But one of the interesting things that came up was a woman by the name of Maggie James would have been, she was a Black woman, she would have been one of the early, at that point, I think they were called executive directors. She would have been the executive director, which is now the equivalent of president or whatever of NTL. And the decision was made that even though Maggie in 1,000 ways was the most qualified person for the role, the person who probably would have had the most dedication in the role, and any criteria that you wanted to use as an indicator of success, except for one thing. NTL at that point wanted to start appealing to corporations. And the position was a Black woman is not going to be able to be the face of this organization. What NTL wants to do is to appeal to organizations, corporations, which primarily have white males as their leaders. Yeah. And so she was not given the executive director role. It was given to a white male at that point. Now, we cut a deal that since she should have gotten that role and she was a Black woman, that the next person who received that role would be a person of color. But again, that's one of those instances of do you decide to be the martyr and fight for what you think is quote unquote just or justice or whatever, or do you say, you know, I'm probably going to lose this battle, and so to do what many Blacks who people called Oreos who were sitting on board used to do, which is to say, what can I get from my constituency out of this? Yeah. And still hold this seat and hold this position of influence and power.
Yeah. So managing the boundary, that boundary between I want and we need, your own values allow you to navigate that space and manage it in a way that you didn't have to pay that price.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is 40 years later, that has become the thing that I am more invested in than anything else. And that is that and I say this particularly in the context of NTL, because NTL is one of the places that even though we are supposed to be an organization made up of some of the most knowledgeable, aware, skilled, applied behavioral science people in the world, that we don't do as well as anybody else. And in many cases, we do it worse. And that's, can I look at all of my behaviors and ask myself when I go to act them out, no matter what I do is going to be self-serving. But is this behavior that I'm about to act out also whole-serving? Right. And I'm primarily asking that question in context of not your particular organization, but the world, the universe as a whole. Is this both self-serving and whole-serving at the same time? And most cases, people deal with it as either or, but the fact is, everything I do is self-serving. So I actually only have to answer half of that equation, which is what I'm doing is self-serving? Because I wouldn't be doing it if it weren't self-serving. Is it also whole-serving? And which whole is it serving?
Which
so
whole?
Even when we talk about the thing of social justice, I say, you know, sometimes I get irritated with NTL. With one of my friends is the president of a university. She just opened up a Institute for Social Justice, and I said this to her. I said, you know, I always have to ask social social justice advocates of who is your social justice for? Because most of the people that I have experienced who are adamant about being social justice advocates, if you get right down to it, their justice is just us. And basically they have an enemy
Right.
that they are fighting. And so my question is, am I included in your just us? Because if I'm not, then your social justice is not about the universal we. It's about your group. And that's not necessarily any better than any white supremacist or somebody else who is saying my group's better than that group. And if it comes right down to it, you know, it doesn't matter whether you're on the boat or not. In fact, we prefer that you weren't on the boat.
So, okay, so social justice has always been, so well, I don't know if it has always been, but for as long as I have known, it has been at the core of what NTL is striving for, to work towards, to fight for. It's embedded in its reason for being, mission, vision. Would you say that NTL has been living its mission, vision, or maybe a better question would be,
no, ask a question. I have an answer for that question.
you have me reflecting on my questions, I'll tell you that. Huh? But that's not a bad thing.
Well, that one anyway, yeah, because I would say no. And anybody that you talk to in NTL who knows me would know, John would say no to that. And John's no would be, at this point, NTL's not sitting at a major table any place in the world in relationship to any particular subject or content that is dealing with a single major issue that is facing humanity. Now,
was there such a time?
Yes.
Can you tell me about
that? We had a person, one of the founders, one of the 5 founders of the Gestalt OSD program, who was the OD consultant to the president, who had an office in the West Wing. There were a group of us who were consultants to the National Democratic Party. There were a group of us who worked with the Black Caucus. What's the point that I was about to say? Going back to the roots of NTL, and then the Navy, you know, was significantly involved in the very early days of the T group. One of the people who did a major piece of the work with the Navy in relationship to their work in relationship to race and racism, Frances Baldwin, was a Black woman.
Yes.
So yes, not only NTL people or NTL members, but Blacks from NTL. You know, so yeah, I think there was a time when we were sitting at those tables, not necessarily as NTL the organization.
Right.
We had members. We had members who were sitting at those tables, and I think that it's one of the reasons that I wasn't in favor of using appreciative inquiry for this 75th anniversary thing, because at its core, appreciative inquiry in its purest sense is supposed to be looking at what are the 3 to 5 life-giving forces of this organization, that without these particular 3 to 5 life-giving forces, this organization would not be this organization.
Okay.
That's the place that you start. And what I've said with NTL is, whether you deal with it as social justice, which actually wasn't in the stuff at the beginning of NTL, it was around teaching people to do better training and to support people in terms of their working more effectively in groups. That if NTL looked at the beginning of that a large part of it that was with the National Education Association, and we're doing stuff across race boundaries and whatnot. We have probably done some of the most innovative, creative, experimenting with trying to create an equitable organization, trying to create an organization where the power and the influence and the access to resources was shared across that organization in terms of all of the members or the participants in the organization. We have, for the most part, failed. Now, that's not a terrible thing, because you can't learn without failing. So what do we most have to offer to the world? What NTL, I think, has most to offer to the world is to talk about, this is what we set out to do with great intention, with great passion, with great fervor. And in most cases, we fail, sometimes because the environment or the context changed, and sometimes because our own internal shadow mishigas. It doesn't make any difference. It is our learning from those failures that we could bring to any table out there and say, if you actually want to create a society where people are engaging each other from this perspective of things being self-serving and whole-serving at the same time, even though we failed at it, we probably know as much or more about it than anybody else.
Because we had the experience and we probably know what doesn't work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we know what sometimes works.
Yeah.
You know, my whole dissertation was written primarily on my experience with at Davis, but NTL was a big part of that experience. And what I was looking at was what made that Davis experience an environment in which so many people were impacted in a way that no matter where they have gone after that, they've tried to recreate that experience.
Yeah.
It's because something happened there that became a part of their body, their brain, their blood, of saying, wow, the experience that I had there, I want to be able to recreate that someplace else that I have gone, whether it's NTL, whether it's an educational system, whether it's a corporation, wherever it is. I want to create that kind of experience that people had there, where they felt like, wow, this was one of the most exciting experiences of my life, because I just grew and grew and grew. At every place that I turned, there was new learning, there was a new experience.
And so you've had quite a significant amount of time being in and around the organization NTL. And I'd like to pick your brain a little bit in terms of, what do you see in the future? If you had a gift, a wish to say, this is what I think, or these are what I think should be part of NTL's future, what would you offer? Well,
you're not going to like it, but I have slipped into deciding to be very candid and open and straightforward with you. So
don't assume that I won't like it.
so again, I'm going to suggest something that is not new in terms of my suggesting it. And that's that NTL should abolish itself. It should go out of business. Okay. And it should bring together, pretty much like the Horsemen of 1975 or 76 did or whatever, 30 people who are willing to commit some percentage of time, and I'm talking about as much as 30 to 40% time. Now, I know that a lot of people can't commit that kind of time, because the whole economic thing has changed in terms of it takes two people to, you know, make a working family and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But most of the lunatic fringe people in their young years, today as before, they're working 130% time anyway. So we're just talking about the 30% over the 100 that you're putting in, that you're willing to say, I'm invested enough in this organization and the compelling picture of this organization that I'm willing to give it everything over my 100% that I got to put here to keep food on the table and the lights on in the house and whatnot, to support this organization doing what it does because it has the potential of making a difference with its presence in the world on the big stage.
Mm. And so it's a recreation. It's a
But using the base,
Mhm.
of what we've learned. You know, NTL considered itself in the business of OD, which I actually don't necessarily think it is, but let's put that aside. If you don't get stuck around the thing of running T groups
Mhm.
and say, what have we learned? Because in what we've learned, a big part of what we've done in that learning is we've used organizational development theory, concept, and method. We've used systems thinking. So how do we take this, and for lack of any other language, I'm going to call it, how do we take this learning? How do we take this body of knowledge? How do we take this wisdom that exists out of these 75 years of NTL's existence and say that we're going to bring that to the world in a way that anybody can use it? And I say that again from the perspective of not being told, oh, you got to be 45 years old. I became a member of NTL when I was probably 26, for God's sake.
Wow.
And now we don't think that people can change their diaper until they're 40. I mean, come on, that's not real.
Mhm.
So how do we tap into that energy, that life force of these young people who have a lot of life in front of them, who are going to actually be the world that we're going to grow into, but they use this body of knowledge. When I was on the board of ODN, I kept trying to get ODN to stop shooting itself in the foot and say, ODN only needs to own one thing, which they never agreed to. Is consider one of my major professional failures, to say ODN needs to basically say, we're like a wheel, one of those old wheel with axes that come out of it.
Yep.
And ODN sits at the center of it. And the only primary purpose of ODN is to define what is the theory, concept, and method of OD.
Okay.
And anybody that wants to use, or anybody who's using this body of knowledge that we define as OD, they're an OD practitioner. Doesn't mean that they're a professional OD practitioner, because moms and dads use OD.
Okay.
The theory, concept, and method anyway.
Mhm.
But if you're using this theory, this concept, this method, you're practicing OD. Whatever NTL wants to call whatever it is we've created, we say OD is a part of that. Appreciative inquiry is a part of that. What's that new thing that they're calling OD something, Marshak stuff? What's it called?
I don't know.
Okay. Every time we come up with something that's a little bit cutting edge, it's a new thing unassociated with everything else. That's just nonsense.
Yeah. Nothing is unassociated to.
Yeah, and in the same way that you can say, and some people say we are one, and you know that they're just bastardizing it. They don't even know what they're talking about.
Mhm.
But there is a reality of us being one. In the same way that in this wisdom of the world, we're one. And you can say that it can have meaning, or you can say that it doesn't have squat meaning. But I'm talking about it having meaning in terms of us saying we can articulate that, we can talk about how we use it, and we can sit, and you're using it too. You just did it with your kid.
Yeah.
You just did it in solving that problem. You just did it in managing that dilemma.
Mhm. Well, that's a very interesting and different perspective. But I receive it as your wish for the future of NTL. It would be interesting to see what that new germination would look like.
Yeah.
For me, anyway, it would be rather interesting.
Yeah. I know that this may end up being in the final version of this interview. It clearly will get cut out in terms of whoever's editing stuff out and editing stuff in. But we have to ask ourselves, in an organization with people in it who are as aware, knowledgeable, skilled as we claim that we are,
Yes.
how is it possible that we can't even find people who actually want to lead the organization?
Mhm.
You would think that if we are who we say we are, people would be lining up from inside and outside the organization saying, yes, I not only want to be a part, but yes, I'd love to be a leader in that organization.
Yes. What does the organization need to do to remedy that?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I don't know. That's probably one of the reasons that I'm inactive at this point, other than my emeritus status and the fact that I have people who keep pulling me into things for one reason or another, because they feel like I have something to say, even though I feel like most of the time it falls on deaf ears. Um, I don't have an answer to that.
Well, what you've said to me hasn't fallen on deaf ears. I'm fascinated by some of the things that you've said, and I want to thank you for making the time. And candidly, this has been the most candid interview I think I've had, I think. But candidly sharing your thoughts, and your experiences, and we'll see what happens in the future. But I want to thank you, John Carter.
Okay, so I want to say one last thing to you.
I'm going to end the recording, or do you want it in the recording?
Yeah. Did
yes.
Yeah, keep it in the recording.
Okay.
And maybe it's an answer to this question that you just asked, but it's not a fix. I'm not trying to fix in NTO, but I'm talking about creativity. I'm talking about innovation. I'm talking about how do we stop making the same wheel over and over. You know, we were doing some work with McKinsey and Company,
right?
And we were working with the consultants who consulted McKinsey's top corporate consultants, and some of their top McKinsey top consultants that work with their major clients.
Right.
And we had done some work with them, and the work got terminated at a certain period of time, and it got terminated because McKinsey wanted to put it in a bottle and put their name on it. And I kept saying, you know, you can't really put it in a bottle, and you probably, even if you put it in a bottle and you put your name on it, it's not going to be what these people have gotten in terms of their benefit of working with us. But to make a long story short, that group of people who we were working with decided that they were going to pay out of their pocket to continue working with us, even though McKinsey decided that they weren't going to pay for it anymore, since they weren't getting a product that they could bottle.
Right.
And so we said, you know, we've basically given them everything we got. You know, what more can we give them at this point? So we sat down and said, okay, let's look at all of the work that we've done with all of our clients, with ourselves, and say, what is it that has supported our work being successful with these clients? And we came up with the word love. And the next session that we did with that group, we opened the session with them of asking them, we did a call and response. What is love? With each person and then saying, love is.
Right.
And over the next 2 or 3 years, we added 3 other words. So the 4 words are love, thought, gratitude, and harmony. And I'll just give you the first 2 of those. Love, because love is the most powerful force. Thought, because thought is the most powerful action. I'll go ahead with just a short piece of it. gratitude, because gratitude is basically accepting miseries as blessings and being thankful that in many cases we don't know the difference. And harmony, because harmony is the healing of the splits, I, thou, we, they, etc.
Mhm.
And ultimately, we ended up with 7 words, those 4, and then 3 inspirational words, compassion, joy, and kindness. In the organizational work that we do, the first question that gets asked in that protocol of questions is, what are the 3 words that you would use to describe this organization? And I can almost tell you by those 3 words that people come up with how much common ground there is, how strong the shared figures are in that organization, and to some extent, how effective they are in relationship to their building common grounds and shared figures to mobilize them in moving toward their desired outcomes. And so when I think about this work, this appreciative inquiry work that's been called, I wonder if it's possible to pull out what are the 3 or 4 words that are most used to describe NTL, because I think those words, if we could pull them out, would tell us a lot about what this organization has been, is, and has the potential to be. And with appreciative inquiry, appreciative inquiry started out as a action research model. It was being used in Cleveland Clinic by David Cooperrider and Suresh Srivastava. My wife did her dissertation on appreciative inquiry with Cleveland Clinic. But I took appreciative inquiry and said to David and my wife, because when she introduced me to appreciative inquiry, I said it's Pollyannish. I get thrown out of my client's office if I introduce that to them. But ultimately, she came back and she said, John, you've been trying to come up with this project for your client for 3 years and you haven't succeeded. I want you to take another look at this appreciative inquiry thing. So I did, and I thought, oh, these people who came up with appreciative inquiry, they really have something. And the power of this is not in action research. It's in people telling the stories about the life-giving forces. Yes. And they need to tell the stories to each other, not to consultants who are going to go off and sanitize it and bring it back to them. And so that's what we used to introduce appreciative inquiry into Touche Ross and Company. And as a result of that, when they did a worldwide merger in 76 countries, and they had a reverse takeover in only one of those countries, which was Canada, they credited that to the appreciative inquiry study. But the important thing is, the word that showed up the most in that set of interviews was the word love. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know whether anybody's going to do that kind of analysis of this set of interviews or how they're going to process it out or whatever. But my guess is that even if you reconstruct NTL as some new organization, because I tried to do that with the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland at one point to get rid of all of our dark side and demons. And the demons in the dark side rose out of the ashes like a sphinx. So NTL is basically going to be what it has been to some extent. But how can you actually identify what are the actual life-giving forces of this entity that basically, at one point, you could say to anybody in the world, go hang out with those people for 4 or 5 days. It'll change your life. Right. And you didn't say, oh, let me see who's going to be there. You just said, go hang out with that group of people.